Good afternoon, everybody. This is Robbie Falk, the high school beat reporter for the Starkville Daily News. I'm joined by our sports editor, Danny P. Smith. A lot to talk about now as football season is in full swing starting on Friday night. It's a huge Friday for our area. West Point is beginning a run of possible third straight state championship, fourth straight state championship. I'm sorry, they've won so many I've lost count. Starkville's trying to make a run back to the state title as well, and they have probably the game of the week in the state. Big time weekend, Danny, and of course it's a busy time for us, especially for you, rounding up this stuff on Friday nights, but it's also a really fun time for us to get a chance to cover these ball games and to follow these teams, these great players every single year.
And I think the unique thing about tomorrow night is Friday night is that there's so many big matchups right off the bat. You know, there's teams that are taking a big bite right off, immediately for some big matchups. None bigger, as you mentioned, in the state than that Starkville Brandon game. A top three by some polls, definitely a top five matchup for the state this weekend.
Most definitely, and we want to remind you to come check out. If you don't have this already, we have a football preview, and I think our design team, Chris McMillan and Will Bain and Danny, of course, putting this together, they did a fantastic job. We have a breakdown of every single team in the area, from West Point to French Camp, Starkville High School, East Webster. Everybody's in here, and a Mississippi State and East Mississippi preview. So this has schedules. It's got a breakdown of the coaches, the players from every team, and, of course, the preview. So you need to check that out if you haven't already. We have some copies here for you at the paper if you want to check that out. Let's talk, first of all, Danny, about the big game of the week, and that's Starkville and Brandon. I'm going to be down there on Friday night to check that game out. I'm really excited about going to see that atmosphere. I haven't been to that location before, and I've heard some great things about Brandon, but the big thing that people are talking about with this ball game is the quarterback matchup. You have Mississippi State commitment Will Rogers going up against Luke Altmaier for Starkville. They're different age groups. Luke, of course, is a junior. Will is a senior. But those two, I think, is going to be the biggest sidebar from that ball game, other than the fact that you're talking about two teams that are going to be competing for a state title possibly this year.
And when you talk about the first game of the season, sometimes the offenses are ahead of the defenses, and you're looking at two quarterbacks that we'll see how productive they can be against the respective defenses, and it should be pretty interesting. Of course, Starkville got Rufus Harvey, Luke's main target, and that's going to be a pretty good connection that the Brandon defense, which I'm sure is pretty good, is going to have to slow down.
Absolutely, and this is a new Starkville team for the most part. There's a lot of guys missing from last year, but in some cases that's a good thing. And for Starkville, I think Chris Jones is really excited about seeing his new team out there on the field against a competitive ball club from the South that's probably going to be competing for a state title. This is a good measuring stick for that team, and it's like I wrote in my preview, it's not something that I don't think is going to define this team this year, but it is a good spot to start. And when you start off against a team that played for a South State Championship last year, I think that's good for this young team to get their feet wet and to kind of see where they are going into the season.
Yeah, and it's a very gauntlet of a schedule for Starkville High School, and it's going to prepare them for the district schedule coming up for sure when you have to play Brandon and then West Point and Oxford next week in between Brandon and West Point, and then Meridian too down the line. So, speaking of West Point, they've got their own big matchup, a matchup of defending state champions up in Horn Lake. You got defending 6A and the defending 5A state champions up in DeSoto County, so that's going to be really big for them.
Absolutely, and West Point's kind of the same as Starkville. Both of them are battle tested when they go into their division games. So West Point's going to go up against Horn Lake, that they always got Starkville as well. That team's always ready to roll. When they get into 5A and they get into their district opponents, that team is steamrolling people because they've tested themselves against the Starkville Highs of the universe and people like that. So getting a chance to, same thing with Starkville High, getting a chance to match up against a team like Horn Lake that won a state title last year and that has been in those big games, and it's quite frankly they got bigger enrollment. They have more resources than West Point, so they're ahead of the game in a lot of things. But West Point is West Point, and they always seem to get it together. Chris Chambliss lost some guys, but he has a backfield that's very stable, and they have experience. It should be interesting to see how that plays out. And another thing to remember is Horn Lake lost some pretty big stars from last year's team.
Right.
Their top linebacker's gone to Georgia, and he's probably going to be one of the top players in the country this year as a freshman. Ray Darius Jones, their quarterback, who was quite possibly the best athlete in the state last year, he's gone, and they've lost several other guys. So, West Point, they might have a more even playing field on Friday night, so to speak, against Horn Lake.
It's going to be very interesting. You mentioned the skill people that West Point has. Timothy Mays, of course, is one of their big-time running backs. They have to look to replace Jake Chambliss, but Brandon Harris may be a guy that they may throw in there to provide an athlete at that position. So we'll see how he does. But West Point's West Point. You're always going to get good athletes on both sides of the football, and it's going to be interesting to see how they came out. I know they struggled a little bit in their jamboree last week, but I'm sure Chris Chambliss will come up with something in Clay County that those people can be proud of.
Our other big team in the area, of course, is Starkville Academy, and they won a state title a couple years ago. Last year they ran into just an impossible task against Adams County Christian, who was just a juggernaut by that point in the season. But Starkville Academy had another successful year last year. Lost a lot of guys from last year's team. You've had a chance to see them at practice some. I know you're around that program a little more than I am because I cover a lot of Starkville High School, and I'll cover some games this year. But what's your impressions of this team under Chase Nicholson? He always, kind of like Chris Chambliss and Chris Jones, he always gets the best out of his kids, and they're always competitive and they're always competing for district titles. What have you kind of gathered from the first few weeks of practice out of this team?
Well, Chase Nicholson is going to get the most out of his guys. He's got a great coaching staff, a lot of veterans on his coaching staff. He's got Bubba Davis, who's coached in this area for many, many years. Of course, had his running success in West Point. And as long as they have guys with that kind of influence on their staff, they're gonna have a group that's going to respect them and respect their ability. And the jamboree didn't go quite as well as they wanted last week. They didn't score, in two opponents, Simpson Academy and St. Andrews, I believe. But Chase came out of that really liking getting some younger guys in the mix, get some film on them so they can come back to practice and correct some mistakes. And I think they're going to be competitive. Now, right out of the box, they've got a defending state champion in Lamar School who's won a couple of state championships in a row, and Mac Barnes he's another one of those veteran guys in the coaching realm that's been there and done that at Meridian High School and Lamar School down in that same area. So it's going to be a very difficult opener. They've got them at home. I know they're looking forward to opening the season at home, and it's a big game for them too.
What do you know about Oak Hill Academy? I know we're delving into them a lot this year, working with Daily Times leader as well. Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts on what they're going to bring to the table this year, and do you see an improvement on them from last year?
They've got some holes to fill too. They had a winning season last year. They were 7-6, made the playoffs, had an early exit in the playoffs. But Coach Chris Craven there is excited about another season, and he's got his son playing linebacker for him, Jaden Craven, who's expecting big things from him, leading that defense. And he's real excited about his sophomore quarterback, Buddy Deal. In fact, in the jamboree last week against Pickens Academy, he threw a touchdown pass for the only points of the game. Oak Hill defense looks like they're pretty stout. They was able to shut out Pickens, and it was pretty much a game situation. It was an abbreviated game, but it was still interesting to see them shut out a very established Pickens Academy school that's located right across the state line in Alabama. So they have some high hopes out there. Coach Craven says he's still looking to build Oak Hill into something special, and it looks like they're on the road to doing that. The schedule doesn't do many favors. They've got to play a Class 2A in the public school ranks, Manteche, right off the bat, mm-hmm. and then they've got Tupelo Christian the next week. So that's two public schools that are early on the schedule that should give them a good measuring stick right off the bat.
Of course, we're going to keep you up to date on all the schools in the area. Choctaw County's got a big matchup, and the Jeff Roberts area kicks off, and that's a team that's been really competitive the last few years. They're going to start off with Independence in game one, and then the Webster County schools, of course. Eupora and East Webster.
Eupora's in Winona.
Right. Eupora's got a big-time ball game. East Webster's going up against South Pontotoc. They're both going to be tested by 3A teams. And then French Camp, of course, with Coach Nathan Wright. And, they've always been good as the season goes on. They play Winona Christian in game one. So make sure, like we mentioned, if you haven't, go ahead and go up here and pick up one of these previews. They're great. It's a great resource for the rest of the year. And also stay tuned to us on Twitter and on Facebook, and also in the paper on Saturday. We'll have full coverage from around the area. For Danny P. Smith, I'm Robbie Falk. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you down the road.